It's good to see such good numbers here on this very, not just important topic, but a very, frankly, a holy topic that we enter into tonight. So thanks for being here. I'm glad to see young people here. It's important for all of us. When I grew up, we had the first TV in our family. It was black and white. It was this big. It had rabbit ears. There were 3 channels and a couple of grainy channels. That was it. That's not the world we're in today, that's for sure. So anyway, I want to thank the Office for Youth and Families, Laura Danner, directing it, for sponsoring this evening today, and Marcia Siegelstein, one of our catechists, who really was the impetus in getting us started for this. So Marcia, thank you. And before introducing our speaker, and saying a prayer first, I'm going to introduce the speaker's parents first. Joe and Margaret Mary Kersting. Why don't you stand up just a minute. All the way from New Jersey. So again, we'll just get started. It's a wonderful time to have you here. And let's say a prayer. Let's ask Our Lady, since this is St. Mary's Parish, let's ask Our Lady really to intercede with the Lord, that this evening will not just be a good evening, but this evening will bear fruit in our lives and in the lives of our families. So, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Laura?
I bring just our formal introduction tonight to Tom, who we're so happy to have with us. Tom Kersting is a nationally renowned psychotherapist, author, and television contributor. He's the author of Disconnected, How to Protect Your Kids from the Harmful Effects of Device Dependency, and his latest book, Raising Healthy Teenagers, Equipping Your Child to Navigate the Pitfalls and Dangers of Teen Life, just came out this year. Tom has traveled the country speaking in schools, churches, as well as to parents, families, and in corporations, delivering this important message. He's a practicing Catholic, able to articulate the importance of faith in a media-saturated world, and will share some of the latest research, studies, and facts about the dangers of device overuse with us this evening. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you. Okay. So how did I get into this topic? So we're going to go back to 2008, when I was still working in a public high school. I used to run a committee at the high school called the 504 Committee. And if you don't know what a 504 plan is, I'll explain really quickly. So a 504 plan is an accommodation plan that is offered to regular education students if they have some sort of an impairment, injury, or whatever it may be, something that may be affecting them academically. So I ran that committee for many years. So it's September 2008, and the protocol is if a parent believes that their child has, and whatever it is, an impairment, disability that is impacting them educationally, they contact us, we set up a meeting with the committee, and then we decide. Parents come in, first meeting of the year, early September, and sit down and explain to us that their 14-year-old son, who's a freshman, had been recently diagnosed with attention deficit disorder. Okay, and they're going over all the information. And I just remember sitting in that meeting saying, oh, hadn't seen that prior to that in the many years that I've been running this committee. And I'm just thinking to myself, how is this being picked up now? Because ADHD, if you don't, I'll explain something about it, is a neurological condition that you're born with. Right? It's not something you get. It's something you're born with. The average age of diagnosis is 8 years old. And if you're the parent of a child with ADHD, you can't not notice the symptoms by the time that child is 5 years old. Symptoms include inattentiveness, lack of focus, disorganization, and sometimes hyperactivity and impulsivity. So we had this 14-year-old kid, and the first thing that comes to my mind is, how did he fall through the cracks of elementary and middle school? This is like a really good school district. So whatever, kind of chalked it off as a one-off kind of thing. Following week, we have our next meeting. same thing. New set of parents, 14-year-old with ADHD. Long story short, the remainder of that school year, almost every referral that we got to our 504 committee was for a teenager recently diagnosed with attention deficit disorder. And it was at that time that I began to investigate just that, trying to figure out what on earth is going on here. I felt like I was alone, questioning this. This just didn't add up. Like, this doesn't make any sense. It would be like all of a sudden, a bunch of, swaths of teenage girls developing breast cancer, right? So, while I was doing my research, I came across the study of a renowned physician out of UCLA by the name of Gary Small. And back around that time, Gary Small conducted a national research study called Your Brain on Google. And it got a tremendous, basically what they were doing back then is they were using brain scans, seeing what kind of activity was taking place in people's brains when they were on the internet. So it got a tremendous amount of media attention, and the media sort of, took the information and headlined it along the lines of technology is making us smarter because we're using more of our brain. But Dr. Small and his team of researchers did not see it that way. They saw something more sinister, I guess you could say. And what really captured my attention was a quote that one of the researchers put out there. Not a quote, an expression that he referred to as acquired attention deficit disorder. And what they meant by that is that they estimated, based on their professional experience, that 70% of kids that are older, like 14, in that age, that were being diagnosed with attention deficit disorder didn't have attention deficit disorder. They had the symptoms of attention deficit disorder. Okay? Which I'm going to get into in a moment. I'm going to explain exactly what that is. So during my research back then, the Kaiser Family Foundation, in 2008, right when I'm in the middle of all this, conducted their second national survey on media use among kids between the ages of 8 and 18. The first one they conducted was in 2004. And basically, they just trying to get an idea of how much digital media kids were consuming. So when the results came out in 2004, it revealed that the average kid in that age bracket there was spending 6.5 hours per day using digital media. 2008 rolls around, and their plan is they want to do this every 4 years. They almost didn't conduct the survey again because they felt they'd reached the ceiling on the amount of time that there isn't in a given day for that number to go up anymore. And they conducted it again anyway, and much to their surprise, the number went from 6.5 hours a day to 7 hours, 38 minutes per day in that 4-year period. Everyone take a guess why? Oh, sorry, buddy.
Facebook.
YouTube and Facebook came out. Elevated that number by that much, right? Now you got to remember, back then, in that research, it only included 4 different types of digital media: computer use, video game playing, television watching, and portable music listening devices. So you look at present day data, okay, any studies you see now, it's somewhere between 8 and 9 hours a day that the average kid is using digital media, okay? And in these recent research surveys, kids in those surveys that were considered excessive media users were spending 13 hours a day in front of a screen, okay? So let me explain this acquired ADHD and everything else, right? So raise your hand if you think I could take this very firm plastic clicker here and right now just roll it up into like the size of a ping pong ball. Do you think I can do that? I can do that. I can do that. I'm not the Incredible Hulk. But I can do it because if I went to the maintenance shed in the back of the school and I took out a blowtorch, I can now melt this. And I can manipulate it. And that's where this comes in, the term neuroplasticity. So neuroplasticity is actually the greatest breakthrough in modern day psychology. And here's what it is. You see these sort of tree branch looking things up here? Those are the electrical impulses that we all have in our brain. And each one of those tree branches plays a critical role in human functionality, basically. So the one up here, for example, maybe the pathway you need to be a good communicator. This one may be the one you need to be a good listener. This one may be the one you need to, be able to overcome adversities, right? So these are all very important in what it means to be a human being. Now, here's what neuroplasticity is. Any human being that is engaged in any activity that is considered highly stimulating for 3 hours or more per day, what the brain will do is it will grow new neural pathways to adapt and assimilate to whatever that environment is. And we know that our kids aren't spending 3 hours a day. They're spending triple that amount in the most highly stimulated world. And all that might sound a little frightening to something even more frightening. It's called neural pruning. And what neural pruning is that if there is a pathway that is either underutilized or not being utilized at all, the brain will naturally either weaken that pathway or prune that pathway away. And I see this as a therapist and a school counselor for many years. You know, I've seen a change, not in every kid, but certainly more than ever, just in communication skills, different things. When I tell my jokes and they don't laugh, you know, stuff like that. So we're seeing a lot of these things already. So now we're going to fast forward to 2012. So 2012 was an important year as well. So 2012, a new sheriff came to town in my 504 committee. We started to see a whole new disability that now took over attention deficit disorder. We were still getting a ton of ADHD. And I think you can see what it is, right? So starting in 2012, we started to get an unbelievable amount of kids with anxiety disorders. Right? So much so that, just to put it in perspective, when I was working as a counselor at the high school, maybe once every couple of months I would get a call from the nurse's office. So if a kid was having a panic attack or anxiety or whatever in the class, they go to the nurse's office, relax, and the nurses would call me, and then the kid would come down and I'd help them through it. And every couple of months I get one of those. Starting in 2012, I started getting probably 4 or 5 of those a week, right? And at my private practice, I started getting more referrals that year in 2012 for middle school age kids with major anxiety issues. I got more of those in 2012 than I got collectively from 2001 to 2012. So why is 2012 an important year? And none of that has stopped, by the way. It's continued, and it continues to escalate. And COVID didn't cause this. This was already a year before COVID. COVID just accelerated it. So why is 2012 an important year? Because 2012 is the year that the modern-day weapons of mass destruction became mainstream. So now, I talked about the surveys, television watching, portable music devices. So now everything is wrapped up in this thing. Everything and anything is there in our pocket, everywhere we go, and everywhere you look, right? So getting back to anxiety. So how does anxiety play into this? What does the phone and all this stuff have to do with this elevation in anxiety? Well, it kind of starts like this. Before your kid gets their first phone, whatever age that may be, everything's great. Kids doing well in school, there's no problems at home, they actually want to hang out with mom and dad, right? Everything's fine. And then they get that first phone, and usually very quickly, things begin to sort of unravel, very quickly. Grades might start to slide a little bit because it's hard to get them off of that phone, right? And that starts to create, and it's almost like on a daily basis, and I'm not even exaggerating, it starts to create a lot of hostility inside of our homes. So our once calm, nice house now starts to become, a very sort of a hostile environment. Your grades are falling behind, put the phone down, all this and that, right? And it just continues and continues. So what begins to happen is now the atmosphere in many households is now one of anxiety and stress rather than peace and relaxation. And that's just the beginning of it. And then once, after our kids get our phones, and you got to remember, this is during adolescence. So adolescence is what I call sort of the purgatory stage of development. It's this limbo place where we're at. We're not a child anymore, and we're not an adult. And we're trying to, our kids are changing. They look in the mirror, they think they look weird. They're going through puberty, they're getting pimples on their face, and above all, they're trying to figure out where they fit in the social pecking order, right? So adolescence in and of itself can produce anxiety, insecurity, sometimes some mild depression, and that's normal. It's always been that way. And then once our kids get out of that purgatory stage and into adulthood, they kind of leave that behind. So now our kids are already going through this, and then we give them the modern day weapon of mass destruction. And the next thing they start doing is they suddenly now they've become friends with pretty much everyone in their school and beyond their school. And the first thing they begin to do is they begin to scour through the content that their peers are posting. The photos of themselves, the trips, the vacations, the steak on the grill, the goals they scored in the soccer game, right? And our kids are digesting this a lot during that vulnerable stage, that already compromised stage, right? And your gradual message over some time, because they're already vulnerable, and they're now seeing the human highlight reels of all of their peers, the gradual message that often sinks in is along the lines of this. Everybody else's life is so wonderful. My life really stinks. That happens. The next stage of this is they want in on the action. So they begin to start posting their own photos and their own videos on TikTok and stuff. Not because they're aspiring photographers and videographers, because they want in. They want to be noticed. They want to be recognized. Okay? And it doesn't work that way, unfortunately. So I talk about. Well, actually, let me complete that part of the anxiety. So the next phase that happens is this. Right? So now they're constantly on the phone. There's bickering at home. Grades might be falling behind. They're trying to figure out where they fit in. They didn't get enough likes and streaks, and that affects them. And it starts to really mess with their head. Let alone the content that they're exposed to that's getting into that malleable brain of theirs. And half of it might not even be true. Right? But it becomes a reality because that's how the mind works. The more you're exposed to something, it actually actualizes it. It becomes a belief that's cemented subconsciously. Next part that leads to this anxiety stuff, and depression. Depression is often symptomatic of anxiety. When we get into the middle school and high school years. So I'll put this in perspective. My last year, when I was working at the high school, which was a little over 4 years ago, I did my own survey over the course of that school year. And I asked exactly 100 students over the course of that year, kids that knew me. Kids would just, come down from my help. Some kids like to just come hang out during lunch and we, shoot the breeze and stuff. All these kids knew me and they all trusted me. So I asked them, I told them, listen, I'm going to ask you a question and I want you to be honest with me. And it's not going to leave here. I'm not using anybody's name. I'm not going to call your parents, none of that. And they said, sure, Mr. Kersting. And the question that I asked these 100 high school students was the following. What time do you go to sleep on school nights? And 93 of the 100 kids told me that they went to sleep between 1 and 4 a.m. every night of the school year, and that their parents had no idea. And the reason for that is because guess what's in that bedroom with them? The phone. So the parents listening, the kids are going to hate me, but the parents listening here right now, tip number 1, right, is that phone has no place being in that bedroom with them at night. No place at all, because they can't control it. No matter how much they tell us they're going to control it, they're going to be good, they can't do it. It's not designed that way. The engineers that design these, apps and so forth are a lot smarter than that. So as a result of that, you might not know this, we now have in America a major sleep epidemic among teenagers, to the point where sleep centers are bursting at the seams. And a lot of people don't know this. So forget about everything I talked about, and let's just pretend I started with just this sleep thing. That alone, just that, is enough to trigger a major mental health crisis. Because an exhausted, particularly a young kid, is a non-functioning human being. They cannot be in a good mood, they cannot concentrate, they cannot focus, they cannot know who they are, and so forth. So that's the first thing that needs to be done. That phone's got to come out of that bedroom at a particular time so that our kids can get sleep. Because they can't control themselves. All right, so what I want to talk about next, while I'm talking about all this stuff, is something that I call cyber self-esteem. Okay? And I talk about this in the book. I created it. So, oftentimes I speak, I get hired to speak like I am in the evening, but I also get hired to speak during the day as well to the kids at different schools and stuff. And what I always do, all right, I'm gonna ask this young man right here. Who are you? Hey, Alex. Who are you? Thank you. Okay. Now, Alex, I want you to ask me who I am. I am not Tom Kersting. That's just the name my parents gave me. So let me tell you who I am. Okay. So I am a loving, spiritual, caring, empathetic, motivated, powerful being. What do you have to say to that? You know why I'm saying that? Now, I'm not sharing this because I'm trying to boast about Tom Kersting. I'm sharing that because guess what? Every single individual, I'm going to point to the kids, every single kid in here right now is that as well. But you can't know that. And let me explain what I mean. Is that and more. Okay, so what is the being part of the human? In the word human being. If we, I'm going to refer to the kids here, if our kids are distracted, right now you look at research, kids are distracted literally constantly, all day, every day, constantly, right? So when they're distracted, what they're ultimately distracted from is self. And all those attributes I just pointed out is what self is. It's what God gave us. It's our birthright. It's what all of us have within us. But we're living without it 24 hours a day and not within at all. So in order to dig up that buried treasure, which is in every one of us, I want the kids to really listen to this. In order to do that, that requires repose. It requires silence, prayer, every single day. So what I implore kids to do is to carve out, and this is, I guarantee now, 99% of the kids in here right now have never done what I'm about to tell them to do. But if every kid in our country right now would literally took a time out every day for 10 or 15 minutes in total silence, closed their eyes, and went within themselves, right? I would predict, and they did this on a daily basis, I would predict that in 6 months' time, just from doing that the mental health epidemic among our kids would go down 90%. And here's a good starting point on how to do that. So has any of the kids here ever heard of the term attitude of gratitude? So attitude of gratitude is an intentional endeavor. So what I want the kids to do, if you're going to do this, which I really, really would like for you to do, is when you start off doing this, it's very difficult because our mind subconsciously feeds us 60,000 thoughts a day. So you can try to sit in silence and visualize something, but if you've never done it before, your mind's going to go all over the place. It's going to be very difficult to concentrate on a specific thing. But like with anything, practice makes perfect. So a good first step of doing this inner stuff is using attitude of gratitude. And what that is you sit with yourself for 10 or 15 minutes, start by breathing, which is the breath of life, right? And you start in your mind thinking about everything that you're grateful for. My family, my parents, right down to the shoes on our feet, the heat in our house, the air conditioning, all this other stuff. And when we're doing that on a daily basis, we are now tuning into the deeper part of ourself, the spiritual part of ourself. We're tuning in instead of tuning out all the time. And what happens with that, after maybe a couple of months of doing that, just that component, this attitude of gratitude, you become powerful. And when I mean powerful, you become unbendable. Where you could be walking down the hallways and some kid might say something about you and it doesn't even faze you. Because you're starting to understand the most important thing of all, which is knowing self. Right? And the term self-esteem, no amount of likes, streaks, or followers can fill the inner self. That's why it's called self-esteem, not others' esteem. So if you want to develop a truly robust, powerful self-esteem, it requires developing a relationship with self. And the only way that can happen is in the silence, in prayer. So I want all of you kids to really think that and do that. And I'm telling you, it's transformational. All right, where are we headed now? So the next, and that's the biggest, there's so much data, statistics, but really in a nutshell, what's happening, the reason why our world is so messed up is because nobody knows self. And self is the spiritual part of us. And if we're not operating from the spiritual perspective, then what are we? right? And that's the missing ingredient in our society right now. And that's why there's so much bad evil. Like I talk about it in my new book. I cite some data on like the millennial generation. Like in 1950s, 95% of people had a biblical worldview. Now it's like 10% of millennials, right? God is removed from everything in society nowadays. And, you wonder what, I always say that, darkness isn't actually reality. Darkness isn't a thing. It's simply the absence of light. That's what darkness is. Evil isn't a thing. It's the absence of good. And what is good? What does God represent? All that is good. So that's the problem in our society. Is people they're not connected to the inner self and that higher power. And when good is removed, darkness unveils itself. So, all right. So moving on, multitasking. Let me explain what multitasking is. It's task switching. You're watching TV. You're looking at your phone, going back and forth watching TV. Music's playing. Scrambling around, doing a whole bunch of things simultaneously. That's what multitasking is. Now I'm going to get into multitasking, but first I want to show a video. So everybody just pay attention. I think we need audio. Or maybe we could... Okay. Good hustle. Good hustle. There he is. You want to challenge him or going to sprint?
The monkey business illusion. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball. The correct answer is 16 passes. Did you spot the gorilla? For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half missed the gorilla. If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it. But did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game? Let's rewind and watch it again. Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold.
All right, raise your hand if you got 16 passes. All right, raise your hand if you didn't. Remember, we have priests here. We have to be honest. Okay? Raise your hand if you saw the gorilla. Okay, raise your hand if you didn't see the gorilla. Please do not raise your hand if you saw the color, curtain, changing colors, and all that stuff. All right, so theoretically, we're not supposed to see the gorilla. Because what was the task at hand? Count how many times the players in white passed the ball. So we're really just supposed to see that. We're not really supposed to see the gorilla. So let me explain what this has to do with multitasking. So a number of years ago, another professor, this guy by the name of Clifford Nass, out of Stanford University, was interested in multitasking. Is this good for us, going back and forth with different things? Is it bad? So he conducted his own little experiment with Stanford students. And what he had them do is he started with, he had two groups. High multitasking students, those that said, yes, I do a lot of multitasking, and I'm great at it. And then low multitasking students that just kind of did one thing at a time. They weren't bouncing back and forth between things. So the experiment he had them do was, and he started with the low multitasking students first. So each of them had a tablet in front of them, and it was a slideshow, about 20 slides. And on the first slide, there were 2 red rectangles and 1 blue rectangle. And the instructions were, with each ensuing slide, count how many times one of the red rectangles moves. So for example, on the first slide, the 2 rectangles might have been parallel, and then on the next, it might have moved on the second slide, right? What he didn't, and there was always going to be 2 rectangles through the slideshow. But what he didn't tell them is that there were going to be more blue rectangles added with each slide. There's always going to be 2. First slide had 1 blue, the next one had 5, the next one had 10. Right? Always 2, and the instructions were counting how many times one of the red ones moves. So, in addition to the experiment, he utilized a portable, a functional MRI device where you put those lobes on a person's head, and this way he could see on his own screen what was taking place, what kind of brain activity was taking place. So he starts with the low multitasking students first. They go through the experiment. They pass with flying colors. They were able to get it right. And as expected, when he was looking at their brains, a small area in the executive functioning part of their brain illuminated, which is exactly what's supposed to happen. On to the high multitasking students. They do the same exact experiment with the MRI, and they fail miserably. But what was more surprising to him was that when he was looking at the brain activity part, the high multitasking students were using 20 times more brain power. But it wasn't the executive functioning part of their brain that was illuminating. It was the visual cortex of their brain, the part of the brain that's not capable of doing that experiment. So essentially, from chronic multitasking, the brains of the high multitaskers became confused. So instead of the executive functions kicking in, which is what ADHD is all about, by the way, the wrong part of the brain became confused. And he also discovered that the higher the level of multitasking, the more lousy the individual actually is at multitasking. So going back to what I was talking about, this acquired ADHD stuff, right? Kind of makes sense when you think about it. So I always say, like I had a kid in my office today. Not a kid, he's like 19. I've been seeing him for a while. He's like, feels like he's losing his mind. And, you know, he feels like he's disassociated. So, you know, we looked at his phone. He's spending 8 hours a day just on his phone, on Snapchat, Instagram, and TikTok. Right? And I explained to him, I said, did it ever dawn on you that, you know, you're here, buried inside this device, lighting up your brain is so stimulated all day that when you come out of that stimulation, your brain is just like toast, basically. So he's working on now like completely eliminating that stuff for another couple weeks, and we'll see what happens if he all of a sudden kind of comes back to earth here. All right, where are we headed now? Let's see. All right, so I want to share this too. I was doing a lecture out west, I think before COVID. It was actually a professional development for teachers, and a teacher came up and shared this with me. So what this teacher did in her high school class, it was a 1-hour class period, she had all of the kids take their phones out of their pocket and put the volumes on high. And each of them had their own Google Doc, right? And every time they got an alert, they had to tally it up. Right? So it was kind of like a laser light show, but with beeps during that 1 hour. Beep, 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 constant, you know, a class of 20-something students. So when they collected all of it, there were well over 1,000 alerts in that one class period. And the reason why I share that is every school has different policies. Most of you can have your phone, you can't take your phone out. But most of the kids, when they're sitting in the classroom and that phone's in their pocket, the phone is on vibrate. And they get alerts like every 5 to 10 seconds. So here's how the brain works. We know that the brain can't do more than one thing at a time. Hence, you know, why multitasking just doesn't work. Every time, if they're sitting in, let's say, an AP calculus class, and they're listening to the teacher, as soon as that phone buzzes, it is scientifically impossible for them to hear what the teacher just said. Can't happen. And this is happening every 5 or 10 seconds. So the kids listening to me in here, so kids listening, if you have your phone on you at school, trust me, put it on Do Not Disturb or like leave it in your backpack or something. And you're going to do better in school because you cannot, it's impossible. Brain can't do 2 things at the same time. And another thing, you know, I hear all the time, and I tell kids all the time is, a lot of kids have their phones next to them when they're doing their homework and studying. And they're going to say, well, I need it, right? I mean, that's not really. That's a little manipulative. I tell the parents that the phone never might be next to them. It shouldn't be in the same zip code as them when they're doing, you know, studying and all that stuff. It's just a distraction. Talk to any veteran English teacher that's been a teacher for the last 30 years, and they'll tell you, like, writing a 5-paragraph essay, and writing, I don't know if everybody writes, like, you can't be interrupted when you're writing. You get so deeply enveloped in what you're doing, and as soon as you get interrupted, all that depth is now gone, and you got to start from square one again. So talk to a veteran English teacher, and they'll tell you that like a lot of these 5-paragraph essays that they get from students are literally incomprehensible disasters comparatively, because you can't write a 5-paragraph essay and get distracted every 5 seconds at the same time. All right, so that's very, very important. All right, where are we headed now? All right, video games. Raise your hand if you think video games are ridiculous. All right, about 4 years ago, the World Health Organization officially recognizes gaming disorder as a diagnosable, classifiable condition. So I'm going to share a quick story with you. So this is going back a few years ago. I get a call at my office from the father. Guy calls me up and says, hey, you know, I heard about your book, and I looked you up, and your office is like 5 minutes from where I live. Can I bring my son in to see you? And he explains to me that his son, at the time, was 15 years old and a video game addict. All right, let me put that in perspective. All right, video game addict, right? So this kid, the father was explaining to me that this 15-year-old boy has not been to school in over a year, and Child Protective Services is on his butt all the time, right? And that the kid plays video games for about 15 hours a day. And that he doesn't even come upstairs to have dinner. They bring dinner down to the basement for him. I'm not judging anybody, but this is what they found. This is what they found themselves in, right? So I said, all right, let's set up an appointment. So the kid, they come in the next week. Dad's with the kid comes in. And what I had in front of me was a very overweight 15-year-old boy. Dad told me his cholesterol level was 270 at 15. And the kid was so pale. I'm Irish, I'm pretty pale. This guy made me look like I live, I don't know, in like Italy or something. This kid was so pale because he literally had not been outside at all in like over a year. So I finished the meeting, right, and I have to pull the dad aside. I tell the dad, I said, listen, there's nothing I can do here, right? I think I'm pretty good at what I do, but I can't. There's nothing I can do here. So you know what you need to do. I think the dad thought like he can bring his kid to me and I have some magic wand that's going to make him not want to play the video games anymore. So I told the dad what I knew he didn't want to hear, which was, you have to get rid of the Xbox. That's the only solution. And if you do that, prepare for your son to go berserk, basically, right? So the dad's not sure he can do it, blah, blah, blah. He said, listen, this is the only solution. There is no other solution. So a couple weeks go by, I get a text message from his father. And in the text message it says, I did it. I finally did it. I finally got rid of the Xbox. I feel great. About 15 minutes after that, I get a phone call from Dad, kind of in a panic, telling me that his son took out a knife from the drawer, grabbed his $3,500 Fender guitar, and put the knife blade to the guitar strings, and threatened to cut the guitar strings if his son didn't give him back his Xbox. That's an extreme example. It's not the norm, okay? But some of the less extreme examples are, I'll get a call from parents. This happens regularly. Can I bring my 11 or 12-year-old son in? He's cursing at me, getting physical. He's got holes in his bedroom wall. And it's always the same thing. It's because either the phone or the video game system was removed, right? So I get these like 11-year-old, like these little twerps who come to my office, like, this kid? This kid touched me. What? Polite. And it's actually today I got a call from somebody I know. They asked me for advice. He's telling me his 12-year-old son, he was out at a conference in Vegas or something, a realtors conference. I talked to the guy today. He calls me up and he says, listen, I need your help with something. My son, who's 12, and my wife got into a major argument, okay? And so I had to fly back from Vegas, and my son took a bat out, right, to my wife. He didn't hit her with it. And I'm like, and he's like, he's never done anything like this. And he knows about my books and stuff, and he's like, so it turns out he got his kid his first smartphone a month ago. And in 1 month, this is what's happened. This is the result of it. Now, and then his son actually, when mom took the phone away, that's when everything, erupted. And then the kid wound up fighting, getting the phone, running in the basement, and calling 911 out of town. And then the police came to the house. And then the police, because there was a bat involved, had to call DIFAS, the Division of Youth and Family Services. And now, DIFAS had to go interview everybody, and now, it's just crazy. So why does this happen? I want to share something with you about addiction. So if you look at this right here, okay, the two scales. So all of these things, the video games, the social media apps, right, they have very smart engineers. Some of them are called like attention engineers, right? Where all of the information and their products are designed to target the pleasure-seeking part of the brain that produces dopamine. And dopamine is the feel-good chemical. You go hit a home run, you get a rush of dopamine, right? Every addiction, whether it's drugs, gambling, anything, is all the same thing. It's associated with too much dopamine. So the scale on the right here is when there's an imbalance. So through evolution, back when when times were scarce, thousands of years ago, when we didn't have all this entertainment and so much abundance, the brain created this sort of balancing act. It's called homeostasis, where you don't have too much dopamine, you don't have too little. You don't want to have too much, and you don't want to have too little. But essentially what's occurring now, because all of these devices and everything target that same part of the brain, it's as if our children are walking around with a 24-hour-a-day IV drip of dopamine. And they're chasing dopamine all day long. They don't even know they're doing it. So that's the stimuli. So if somebody's a drug addict and you take the drugs away from them, are they cool with that? No, they go berserk. So it's the same when you take these, the digital heroin away. This is the outcome. It's a withdrawal. It's a form of withdrawal that manifests itself behaviorally, sometimes physically, and all these other things. The good news is, like if you have a kid that's why I'm seeing so much oppositional defiant behavior nowadays. Because of this, I talk about it in the new book. It's a combination of that and a combination of the content. Everything's caught on camera nowadays. Every act of violence. There's a camera on every street corner. There's a camera on everybody's pockets. And our kids on social media are seeing all of these things. Muggings, punches, murders, you name it. And just like anything else, the more you're exposed to something over and over again, it becomes normalized by our brain. Right? And we become desensitized to it. So that certainly, adds to this as well. But the good news is with this homeostasis, if your kid is really off the wall and you take away that device, they're going to freak out in some way, shape, or form. But it'll only take about 30 days for that balance to restore itself, and then your kid will literally come back to earth. All right, so what are we talking about now? Okay. So what? I'm not going to ask anybody to raise their hand, but oftentimes as I don't want to put anybody on the spot, I'll say, raise your hand if you think it's smart for an 11-year-old to have a smartphone, right? I've done this lecture a million times, and I've never had anybody raise their hand, right? Nobody's ever said, yes, that's a really good idea, right? So everybody agrees, right? It's not really a good idea for an 11-year-old to have a smartphone. Yes. All right, well, what would you do if I told you that the average age of first smartphone issuance is 10 years old? Right? So the people in the audience that agree with me that's a bad idea, most of them, their kids have it anyway, even though we think it's a bad idea, which kind of doesn't make any sense. But it kind of starts like this. So like imagine, I remember when my son was born, I'm my first child, and I'm saying to myself, right, I'm going to be the greatest father in the world. This kid's going to be playing for the Yankees, right? He's going to Harvard. He's never eaten McDonald's. Forget about soda. None of that, right? The kid is going to be and it's kind of like the mindset we have with our kids. We want what's best for them. And then as they start to get a little older, they come up to you. Take, for example, your son, right? You're not getting Call of Duty, son. No way. Not until you're 17 years old. And now your son's like 10, 11. Dad, please, can I get Call of Duty? Nope, you know the rules. Yeah, but Steven Cannizzaro got it. I don't care. And then the next couple days later comes up to you. Dad, please, can I get Call of Duty? Come on, Martin McCormick got it. No. A few days later, please, Dad, Patrick Rooney got it. And Jimmy DiStefano gets it, right? And before long, you're saying to yourself as an adult, yeah, you know what? I know that the DiStefanos, they're a great family. Cannizzaros, they go to church every Sunday, right? Yeah, maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm overreacting. Plus, I don't want my kid to feel left out. Bing, bang, boom. Christmas rolls around, there's Call of Duty on the tree. All right? That's called social conformity. Right? It's not necessarily a bad thing, but in this context it is, where we tend to just, like a flock of birds that all make a left-hand turn at the same time, there's a school of fish that all move at the same time. We operate very much the same way. We just kind of take in what's going on around us, and we just kind of give in and cave. I'm going to share a video. I heard some people laughing. There's going to be some serious uproars when you watch this video. And I'm going to talk more. Oh man, I love that. So, that's so informative. But the good news, so what we need to do then is we have to create a new type of conformity. So I came up with an idea, I talked about it in Disconnected. Remember, you know when your kids, you know when you get that packet from your school in the summer with all the paperwork and stuff? So imagine in any school, you get that packet, particularly if you have a child in kindergarten or first grade, when kids really don't have, and most of them don't have devices yet. And in that packet, there's a sheet of paper called, what I call the phone-free school contract, where it says, simply, I agree not to purchase a smartphone for my child until late adolescence. What I'm betting on is that any parent who's the parent of kindergarten or first grader, when they see that, they're going to be like, yeah, that sounds good, right? Then they're going to talk to their friends in town. Did you get that sheet of paper? Did you get it? Yeah, you can sign it? Yeah. And if everybody signs that, it doesn't even have to be school policy. It's just something you can do through the school. And then all the school has to do every so often is, when they send out emails and stuff, oh, remember, we're proud to be a phone-free school. And if we did that each year, starting in kindergarten, and people agreed to it, and you had the majority of kids in middle schools, not having phones, the world would be a better place. There are schools right now out there, some schools I've lectured at have done just that. I'm a big advocate of phones not being allowed to go to school with kids. But it's easier said than done because the phone has become sort of the umbilical cord between the parent and the child. Like us parents can't fathom what if there's an emergency? How am I going to get a hold of my kid? All these other things. I don't know. What did we do the previous 1,000 years? So I'm a big advocate of that. And there are some schools that are doing just that. They've said, there's fears of lawsuits. Some parent that's going to try to sue, you take away my rights, all this and that. But schools that are doing it, I was reading something recently, one particular school, they banned phones, and it's been going on for like 2 or 3 years. What has happened has been nothing short of miraculous. The test scores in that school have skyrocketed. The mental health episodes have decreased to almost zero. The communication is like nothing they had ever seen before because the kids they're talking to one another, they're actually communicating and having fun. So to me, it's a no-brainer. But I don't call it shots. So, all right. Quickly, I'm taking a long time here. Parenting. This is important. So this is an actual statistic. I have it cited in Disconnected. The average parent nowadays spends just 3.5 minutes per week in meaningful conversation with their children. 3.5 minutes per week. And everybody said, I don't even know if I believe that. But I saw that, cited it, and so forth. So essentially, if you think of, if you were to go into like the Webster's dictionary and look up the definition of family, it would look something like the Brady Bunch, right? But I often say that like a typical family of 4 nowadays is not really definitive of what it says in the dictionary. It's more like take a family of 4 individuals, mom and dad included, doing their own thing. Susie's up in the bedroom on her phone, Johnny's in the basement playing video games, dad's checking emails constantly, mom's off, whatever. So it's like we have our households have become a family of 4 that are isolated and individualized and not really together. And that's just a fact. If we could put cameras in every house in America, you'd see exactly what I mean. And part of the problem, the kids are going to like this, right? Part of the problem isn't just the kids on devices, adults. I talked about that 8-9 hours a day. Adults are spending the same amount of time as kids. The difference is we have more advanced brains, we can handle it a little bit better, but it's still too much time. So what do we have to do about that? So remember family dinner? So I know growing up, my parents are here, they love, they're big time Catholics, and I told them I'm going to be speaking, they definitely want to come here, right? So there was no not having dinner together, all with my siblings and my parents. Every night at 5 o'clock, right? Was that what time it was, 5? We had dinner. I did all the cooking. No, I did. And we had dinner, we'd say grace, and we'd have dinner. And that was every household. Now, I understand that in today's day and age, we have both parents working more than past generations, and it's not easy to always do that. In fact, the research shows that families that have meals together most nights of the week. You ready for this one? Without interruptions. Families that do that, here's some statistics on it. The children in those families are more likely to excel academically, are less likely to suffer from a mental health condition, are less likely to get involved in drugs and alcohol, are less likely to engage in early sexual activity, and are more likely to have a higher earning power by age 30, just from having family dinner. Because the relationship is the most important thing. You ready for this one? The most important thing for the mental health of a child is the relationship that they have with their parents. And relationship isn't a relationship if we're not having deep, meaningful conversations around the dinner table or wherever it might be. And if you can't do that, what I advise families to do, if everybody's home at the same time, is when everybody is home at the same time, make it mandatory that everybody has to get together, wherever it is, the living room, the kitchen table, for 15 minutes and just talk. And that's it. And it's gotten so bad that I remember a number of years ago when I was working in the high school, my radar's up on all this stuff. And the high school I worked at had 1,200 students in one entrance. So every morning when I'd be pulling in, there was traffic. And every single time I looked at my rearview mirror, when there was a kid in the passenger seat, it was the same exact sight 100% of the time. And that was the kid in the passenger seat like this. So even a 5 and 10 minute car ride to and from school have now been relinquished to the device. And that 5 or 10 minutes a day, 180 times a year, is absolute fertile ground to actually developing a relationship between parent and child. Each day, 5 or 10 minutes, it adds up to so much. So that's something you really want to think about. If you drive your kids to school, no phone allowed. We're not connecting. We're not communicating here. Yeah, it's just that's the most important thing for our kids. All right, last thing I'm going to talk about, and I'll take some questions. EQ and IQ. That might be one little thing after this. All right, so we know what an IQ is, right? Your intelligence quotient. So an IQ is fixed. So if you're born with an IQ of 110, you're not getting it to 140. No matter what you do. You can go read every book in the you might be able to bump it up a few points, but it's fixed. It's what you're born with. So if you're born, if you're my age, I'm 6'1", I'm not growing to 6'5". Not going to happen. I wish it would, because then maybe I could play in the NBA. But EQ, which stands for emotional intelligence, also known as emotional intelligence, is the following. It's the ability for an individual to understand their emotions. It's the ability to regulate one's emotions. It's the ability to empathize with the emotions of others. And it's the ability to handle adversities. It's the ability of a recent college graduate, as an example, that doesn't even have that great of a GPA and happens to get a job interview and goes on that job interview and just blows these people away by his or her very presence. That's what emotional intelligence is. Now, emotional intelligence is not something that we are born with, like an IQ. In fact, having a high EQ is twice as important for life success as having a high IQ. Now, the question is, if an EQ isn't something we're born with, how do we get one? How do we develop a strong EQ? Through hard work. Anybody want to guess what the hard work is? Face-to-face interaction with our fellow human beings. And our kids, they have face-to-face interaction, but let's be honest, they don't have a fraction of the face-to-face interaction that previous generations had. And that's what we are as human beings. We're social, emotional, spiritual beings. We communicate more on an energetic, spiritual plane than we do verbally. Like if I was to walk up to you right now here, like do you feel, are you comfortable right now? I'm standing here talking. If I was here the whole night talking, do you feel okay with it? No. See, there's an energy, there's a certain space. And that's not a bad thing, right? So we feel each other. But you can't feel, and we pick up unconsciously on the nonverbal nuances of communication. And the reason why I bring that up is we have to get our kids communicating more. Play, for example, outdoor play is down 70% in recent years. And every time a kid plays with other kids, it activates 3,000 genes in the cortex part of the brain. And that's the part of the brain that shapes us socially. So kids not going out on the playground, kids are meant to be out on the playground, getting the ball taken away from them, crying and learning from that, scraping their knee and all that. They're not meant to be cooped up in a bedroom by themselves, sucked into the virtual, dangerous, evil world. So we have to do better at that. All right, cyber habitat. I should have, I have to put an owl in there. I'll explain why. When my daughter was younger, I went on a field trip. She asked me to go on a field trip, and it was to a raptor rescue center. Raptors are birds of prey. Owls, eagles, hawks, so forth, right? So, beautiful place, all these beautiful birds. So at the end of the field trip, everybody, all the children, I think she was in like 3rd grade at the time, all the kids congregated in a room. And out of the back door, the instructor comes out with this big owl, with big yellow eyes, right? And the kids are marveling at this owl, right? And the thing was beautiful. The lady had one of those like leather sleeves on. And so she goes out to explain that somebody found that owl when it was a baby a few years ago. It fell out of its nest and had a broken wing, and they brought it there. And that owl has been living there, for several years now, and is healthy and this and that. So one of the children innocently raises her hand and says, "Excuse me, ma'am, if the owl is healthy, how come you haven't released him back into the wild with its mommy?" And the instructor had to explain that if they released that owl out into the wild, that the owl wouldn't survive in its natural habitat. It wouldn't know how to hunt or do any of that stuff. And I share that for a reason, and I do hope I'm wrong about this, but when you just kind of put it in perspective, if our kids are spending the majority of their waking hours in another habitat called cyberspace, the cyber world, and not in the real world, being present, communicating with others, delving within, praying, all that stuff, if they're not doing that because they're sucked into some other world, how are we supposed to expect them when they have to go into the real world on their own to survive and thrive? That's something we need to think about. All right, real quick, couple tips. I already told you the ones. No phone in that bedroom, period, right? During car rides. Get together, have more communication together. You want to get your kids involved in everything in the household. You want to have, that creates dialogue, doing dishes together, cooking. And it also, helps them to be functional members of society. I'll skip that. If you're going to get, there's a phone called Gab Wireless. Anybody here ever heard of it? Yeah, so Gab, they make this, it looks like a smartphone. It's really a dumb phone. So for young kids, it's fine for young kids because it doesn't have any internet access. So it's like a flip phone, but it doesn't look like a flip phone. You just make phone calls and text. So that kind of ameliorates this idea of what if I can't, how do I get a hold of my kid? Well, there you go. Talked about that already in cars, during dinner. One thing I'm a big fan of for video game players is no video games during the school week from Monday to Thursday. And the reason for that is because when kids are in 5th and 6th grade and they're into Fortnite, for example, when they're sitting in school, they're distracted and they can't wait to get home and play Fortnite, and they're not learning to their potential. And then when they do get home, usually the rule is if you do your homework and finish your studies, you go play Fortnite. And from my experience, a lot of the kids that are doing that, they're flying through their studies so they can get to the Fortnite. So if it's not there and available, they're going to pay attention better in school and they're going to take more time and study better. All right, homework time, we talked about that. All right, it's getting late. We'll get right to some questions. And you guys were great, by the way. I really appreciate it. I want to thank everybody.
So Laura Danner has the microphone, and she'll come to you if you raise your hand and ask Tom a question.
All right, so that question is asked every time. Okay, I'm going to try to say this because there are kids in here, okay? So the answer to that is a little bit of a zinger. And the answer is when you feel comfortable with your child watching adult content. Because
That's what they're going.
what's that?
Because that's what they're going to be exposed to.
That's correct. There's no avoiding it. And they see something, and they're going to click on that, and it's going to take them down a path that we don't want them to be on.
Great talk. I'm so glad you're sharing this stuff because it's heartbreaking, I think, what's going on. I was just wondering if you might comment on the younger than age 2 group. There's something that is out there, virtual autism, perhaps, and then how it interferes with development and programs everything later on.
So I'm glad you asked that. So what is it called, the organization? I think it's the National Academy of Pediatrics. We have a new organization. But they recommend for kids under the age of 2, 0 hours of screen time a day. And kids between 2 and 8, 1 hour for the purposes. Kids over the age of 8, 2 hours. Right? That's pretty ambitious. So let me give you an example of some of the stuff I hear. Has anybody here ever heard of the term Kersting2? Probably not, right? I talk about it in this connect. So what's happening now with younger moms that have been born into this generation, while they're nursing their children, right, which is a very, very intimate type of thing, and very important to the development of the child, the connection, they're on their phones while they're nursing. So they call it Kersting. And what's happening is it's affecting infants developmentally, emotionally. They shut down. Because that connection, the smile and the mom making the faces and all that stuff is very, very important for their emotions and their brain. So a lot of kids are shut down. That might have something to do with early autism. You know? So that's an example right there. And then, what drives me crazy too is, you go around, go in the supermarket, and it's like everybody's got a device in front of them, And I remember back when the first edition came out of Disconnected, we went to Aruba, my wife and kids, and this stuff is fresh in my mind. We went to this, it's all families during February break, and we went to this restaurant. I think it was called like Giovanni's or something. Italian restaurant. There's like 1,000 people at this place, and we're going to get seated. And we had to go all the way to the other side. Every single kid in that restaurant was on a device, and I was just thinking to myself, I wish I had like a box of plates I could start flipping around.
Right here?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I appreciate the talk and really great concepts and with lots of heads nodding, which is amazing. I think we all as adults have to realize also that our kids are growing up in a time that's very different than when we were. These devices didn't impact our lives the way that they're impacting our children's lives. And I think as we go through these transformational changes as a society, there's always going to be negative aspects of the change, and there's positive too. So these are tools as well. And I'm just curious because not every aspect of the technology and the screens are negative. I'm just curious if you have a perspective on what positive aspects of them are there, and how can we as parents use the positives, whether it's an app or a way of controlling things, incentivizing, because as our children grow up, these are tools they're going to be burdened with or blessed with for the rest of their life, and they're going to have to learn how to manage them, be responsible, and get utility out of them. So I'm just curious if there's any positive aspects that...
So I'm glad you brought that up because I forgot to say this, all right? So technology is great. It is awesome. That's how I got here today, by GPS, right? It's not the technology that's the problem, all right? So a glass of wine with dinner, that's fine. 9 glasses of wine with dinner, 365 days a year becomes a problem. If you go to the gym for an hour or 2 a day, great. If you go to the gym 9 hours a day, you have a problem. So it's not the technology itself that's bad. It has fantastic attributes. It's the quantity of time, right? That's the real problem. And it's designed, again, like if we want our kids to use it for positive purposes, fantastic. And a positive purpose is, for educational, as a supplement. I don't think it's a good thing as a primary form of learning. But as a supplement, the problem we run into is when they have, when kids have that, school-issued computer in front of them that they're not allowed to do A, B, C, or D on, they can't help themselves. They wind up going off on YouTube, on TikTok, and all this other stuff. So it is a very positive thing. So I don't want to make it seem all bad. It's just that the overall quantity of it, that's what the problem is.
Yeah, thank you for everything. So my question is related to the digital calming technology, because I'm finding now even psychologists, psychiatrists are steering kids even to the digital platforms like Calm and other things to calm us. So how do you kind of redirecting them back? I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Are you talking about like the relaxation apps and stuff?
Yeah. Like how do you get the kids to decompress?
Yeah. Well, like I mentioned earlier, like if we take the time every day, 10 or 15 minutes or even more, the more we do that, and 10 or 15 minutes is just a starting point. But if we are, I'm going to give you an example. Like, so about a month ago, my daughter, she's coming down, she has to, when she's upstairs, she'll FaceTime her friends and stuff. She does her homework downstairs. But the rule is she's 17, the phone comes downstairs at 10:30, right? It's always been that way. She comes down. So I'm in the family room, and I decided I'm just going to turn the lights off, right? And I'm just going to sit and close my eyes and do what I do, right? So she comes down and like turns the light and goes, Dad, what are you doing? I'm like, and I said to her, I'm being. She goes, what do you mean? And I said, I'm being. She's like, you're crazy. Right? So the point is the decompression, it's unfortunate that we actually have to think about having to do that. But if we're proactive with it, we're getting into this silence, getting to know the deeper part of self, that becomes a very conscious thing the more we practice it, where we can just go about our day and we're present. Right? So for example, let everybody right now, I want everybody to do something right. Take a breath of air right now. So what's the difference between that breath of air that we all just took and the previous 10,000 breaths of air we took today? The previous ones we didn't know we took. It was automatic, done by our subconscious mind. The moment we take an intentional breath of air, we're now conscious, which means we are present. Right? We are present. And that's spiritual. Like one thing I think about all the time in the Bible is the expression, closer is he than, nearer is he than breathing, closer than hands and feet. Right? And that's all that it takes when we become present and we just think of God. God's here. You know, but that is the key. The decompression is more, in my opinion, it's not a strategy. It's got to be a proactive thing so that we don't have to decompress, where we're just, you know, gliding along spiritually.
This was a great talk. Thank you very much. And one of the things it's done for me is it's made me look at my own device use as well, which, you know, we're setting an example and they're watching us and we're telling them to do something that maybe we're not doing ourselves. This whole idea, this little kid over here is very funny. He was raising his hand when you asked if it was a good idea for an 11-year-old to have a cell phone. He's the one person in all of your speeches that raised his hand. But we felt like if the child doesn't have the phone, it's like a social debt. But once they get it, it's a spiritual debt. Everything that we're trying to teach them, the phone is taking it, is really giving them the counter argument. And a big part of it is the peer pressure. And yep, there are parents out there, like our son can go down onto that Xbox at any time of the day or night, and his friends are on there. So we're like, what are the parents doing? Like, a lot of these kids are just constantly down there. So what if you made it like a driver's license? What if you took the peer pressure away and a kid, couldn't get a cell phone until they were 16 years old and they have to be licensed to do it? I really feel like it should be some kind of a social upheaval to save our children and ourselves from what's happening.
And what's interesting is, I think in Florida and another state, that they're about to pass bipartisan legislation where children under the age of 16 are not allowed to have social media. So I'm not sure how they're going to pull it off, but they're going to try to.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm not a big fan of, like, the government controlling everything, but we got to, in this aspect, something got to be done. You know, because we're not doing a good job of it. All of us, let's just be honest.
We're certainly trying. It is very.
It's big. Yeah. And interestingly, too, again, I talk to so many kids and stuff in my office. I've had kids that have had their devices removed, right, because things were happening. And, you know, and after about 3 or 4 weeks of not having it, I'm telling you the truth, they recognize, they feel something. They feel better. In fact, I get a lot of kids that go to sleepaway camp that come to my office, right? For the summer, they go away for 7 weeks. And then in September, parents call me and say, oh, I want to get so-and-so back in, right? And I'd ask these kids that go to sleepaway camp, what was the best part of sleepaway camp? And many of them, you know what the answer was? Because you can't have a phone at sleepaway camp. So imagine like going to sleepaway camp and panicking because you can't have your phone. Many of them told me that the best part of sleepaway camp was not having their phone. Because guess what they experienced? They experienced what we inherently crave, which is dialogue and a relationship, sitting around the fire, telling stories and communicating.
I tell them to go outside because the graphics are awesome.
It is, isn't it? Yeah. It's very real. All right, so I'm going to, I brought books, so I'm going to head back there. If anybody wants to purchase a book and has any more questions. And then, you know, if I didn't get to any other questions, you can always email me.
Can we take one more right here, Tom?
What's that?
There's someone right here. Do you mind if we take one more question?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Let's go. Yeah.
So I have a comment and a question. The first is a comment. We raised our children as the first generation of tech kids. And we did not allow them to have a computer in their room or use their phone in the room or have a phone until they were older. We were not popular. They're young adults now and they thank us. So there's hope. The question is there any follow-up research on kids who experience addictive behavior early on? Do they have a higher risk of becoming addicted later in life to other things?
Well, I haven't seen any of that, but just from experience, I can tell you this from substance abuse, and this isn't much different. So the earlier that any human being has their first drink or their first joint, whatever it is, the percentage of them becoming an addict skyrockets. Right? So the longer we delay, whether it's that or I would imagine devices and everything, then the less likely they are to become full-blown addicts. But there is some good things that I've seen. I'm very happy to see. Is, I get people I see on and off for a long time. They were young teenagers, and they come back when they're in their 20s and so forth. So I've had some, over the last couple of years, some clients of mine that are 24, 25 years old, and they're now in the work world, and they're deleting their Snapchat and their Instagram and TikTok because they realize that it's just a time sucker and it's interfering with their progress in their profession and so forth. So that's a good sign. That's which I'm very happy to see. But again, Father, I want to thank you for having me and everybody else. And I'll be in the back.
So there was a lot tonight, but for all of us, boy, it would be good if we could take that time in prayer, isn't it?
Thank you, Laura, Marcia, Father Royal. We just had a nice little meal over at the rectory. It's my kind of church. So I usually get right into this, but when I told Father Royal there's a story that I want to share that's pretty incredible, and it does tie into this topic. So back about 15 years ago, I started doing a lot of meditating. Where I'd sit with myself, and anybody here ever heard of the law of attraction, right? So I started really practicing all these things, visual on a daily basis, right? And just manifesting things, right? My parents would be like, "This is prayer," right? All the time. I'm like, "Yeah," but it was more just a visualization thing. And about 6 years ago, I was doing one of my visualizations. The first edition of that book came out, and it was I self-published the first edition of that book. And as I'm meditating this one particular day, all of a sudden it just starts turning into prayer, right? And I wasn't intending on doing it. I just started saying, Our Father to myself, all these other things. And growing up, I went to Catholic school my whole life. Went to church every Sunday, right? There was no missing Mass on Sundays. And like many of us, there was a period of time where I kind of fell away from it and wasn't going to church every Sunday. I made the excuse I'm too busy coaching my son in baseball, all these things. So during this meditation, I had a calling. And the calling was, it's time to start going back to Mass. So I grabbed my wife and I said, listen, start this Sunday, we're going to start going back to church. And it was like, I'll be honest with you, it was the first time where I really was going to Mass because I wanted to, not because I felt that I had to. And I had this calling on it. So the first edition of that book came out, and I put that out. I was doing going on TV a lot. I do a lot of media stuff, and I was going on Fox and Friends, the morning show, a lot, right? And they had me on when there was a story in the media about mental health, kids, screen time, and so forth. And all of this is happening on other shows, Today's Show, but mostly Fox and Friends. So during one of my meditations, I'm thinking to myself, all right, if I could get on Tucker Carlson's show, if you remember his show, because his show is like the #1 show on prime time, and I didn't really have any evenings here. So I start going back to church. I'm doing my meditations. I got this new book. I'm thinking to myself, and I really just want to get this message out to people. And TV is a good way of doing that. A book's an even better way to do that. And so I start meditating on it and praying on it. And about 2 weeks go by, and I get an email from a woman by the name of Kelly McNally. She was like the main booker on Fox and Friends in the morning. And she probably had me on 50 times, I would say, right? So I've known her for several years. And so I see an email from her, and I think it's going to say, hey, you want to come on Fox and Friends? So I open up the emails. It says, hey Tom, it's Kelly, how you doing? Sorry I haven't been in touch. The reason why I'm reaching out is that I'm no longer with Fox and Friends, and I'm now the supervising producer of Tucker Crossing Tonight. And I want to see if you can come on tonight to talk about, there was a story with Sean Carter on Facebook, so I'm like, holy cow, right? I just really brought this to me. So, so I go on Tucker, I get home, and I'm trying to go in the back end on Amazon and do self-publishing as an author portal, all these other things, just to see the sales rank, how many copies sold. And typically, if I would go on Fox and Friends, I might sell like a couple of hundred copies of the book, right? It's a good way to get your message out. So it's not updated. And it's supposed to update every hour, so I have to go to sleep. Go to sleep, get up the next morning, and I can't believe what I'm looking at when I'm looking at the, at the screen later. So the book was like number 2 in sales rank out of every book, and like 4,000 copies had sold, right? That's not the half of it. Wait till the rest of the story. So, in addition to that, so prior to that, I had been speaking for years on this topic. The first lecture I gave was in March of '09 on this topic. So I've been lecturing, and every lecture I ever did was for public schools. They would contact me, come speak to the parents in the evening, to the kids. So I go in my email after doing this Tucker Carlson segment, and I have dozens of emails. And I have dozens of requests to speak all throughout the country. And every one of them was from a Catholic or Christian organization, right? And I had never even spoken to a Catholic or Christian organization. So I'm just saying to myself, holy cow, this prayer and going to church stuff is really working, right? So anyhow, in addition to that, I received 4 emails from 4 publishers in 4 different countries. Italy, Czech Republic, I think, Germany, and I think Korea, asking if I had the foreign rights to the book. So foreign rights are a part of, you do traditional publishing, they own all the rights. So I self-publish it, I have the foreign rights, right? So I'm like, I sure do. So I contact a colleague of mine, this woman Jennifer, we met many years ago doing some TV thing, and we talk and, just run things by each other. She's very parallel to what I do. And I'm explaining to her, so at the time I was working at a public high school and had my private practice. And I was a year and a half away from retirement, hitting my 25-year mark. So I'm on the phone with her, and I'm saying, this is so great. I'm getting all these lecture requests, but I don't know how I'm going to do it. Because I can't just, I'm working at school. I can't just say, hey guys, I'm going to leave for a week. See you next week, right? So she said to me, she said, ask God for a sign. And I said, well, what do you mean? She's like, well, ask God for a sign. And she said, think of something symbolic that you like, and it's going to present itself to you when you least expect it. So, first thing that comes to my mind is golf, because I love golf. And so I said to Jennifer, I said, how about a golf ball? She said, yeah, think of a golf ball. I'm like, nah, that's not going to work. Because every time I open up my trunk, where my golf bag is, there's golf balls rolling around all over the place. So I said, how about a quarter? She goes, think of a quarter. It's going to present itself to you in a very strange way. So I had the conversation with her. I get out of my car, because I was commuting from the high school to my private practice, go up to my office. I had my appointments, finished at 7 p.m., completely forgot about the conversation I had with Jennifer. And I'm driving home, and there's this liquor store that I pass. And they have this particular, every so often they would get this particular beer I liked that was very hard to get. And I'd stop in there, and I'd never have it. So I said to myself, all right, let me see. So I pull in, sure enough, they had it. And you're only allowed to get 1 4-pack, right? Because they barely get any of it. So I get the 4-pack of beer. It was something like $13.78. Give the guy a $20 bill, and I'm talking to him, and he hands me the bills and the change, but it's not 23. It was set, I was supposed to get 23 cents back, and he must have rounded it off to a quarter. So now this quarter falls between my fingers, from about this height from here to here, and is spinning, defying the laws of physics, literally spinning, like if you ever flick the quarter, right in front of me. And I'm just saying to myself, what the heck is going on here, right? So now I'm driving home, and I'm in this kind of surreal state of mind, like this is just, I believe this, but this is a little too in my face here, God. And I'm saying to myself, when I get home and pull in my garage and I turn the light on and I look at this quarter, if it says 1972, the year I was born, actually 92 I was born, If it says 1972, I'm really going to freak out. So I turn the light on in my car, I'm looking, it does not say 1972, but then I notice another inscription that I forgot was on every coin, and there it is staring at me in the face, and it says, "In God we trust." So now like the hair is standing on my back, right? So I'm like, holy cow, right? And it gets better, I'm not done. So now I had to contact a literary agent, for the contracts for these potential book deals in these other countries, right? Because you need an agent to do that. So I called Jennifer, and she had a book published with this agent. Her name is Celeste Fine. I had a meeting with her years prior in the city, and Celeste Fine became the #1 literary agent in the United States and only deals with like the top 1% of authors. Right? So I'm like, do you think I should email Celeste? She's like, yeah, why not? I'm like, she'll get back to me? She's like, yeah, I mean, she knows who you are. And if you have a potential deal on the table, why wouldn't you do it? So I contact Celeste, I email her, she gets right back to me, hey Tom, good to hear from you. I'll take a look at it, and I'll get back to you. A week goes by, I get an email from Celeste, and she says, Tom, I read your book, and this is the self-published version, and I think it's great. Would you consider taking it traditional here? So I'm like, are you serious? So it's basically like getting a traditional publishing deal through her is like making the New York Yankees in the publishing world, right? Because she's dealing with the biggest publishers. So she says, I'm going to set up some meetings with some of the big publishers, and we'll see what happens. So she sets up these meetings, and every one of the acquisitions editors from these big publishers are women with children, okay? Which is moms. And they had read the book in the intro, and they're saying, blah, 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 asking all kinds of questions, you think it's great. And now you hope you get one of them that wants to, produce a publishing deal. So, I don't know, a few days go by, so we didn't get an offer. We got 3 offers, right? One from Penguin Random House, which is like the largest publisher, Tarcher pedigree. And I'll tell you the other one in a minute. So what the agents then do is they set up something called the first best bid auction. So they get back to the acquisitions editors and say, there's 3 of you that want the book. By Friday at this time, we're doing an auction, they call an auction, come up with your best advance and terms. And the publisher, which I had never heard of, okay, that came in with the best offer, is Baker Books. And Baker Books is the 2nd largest Christian publisher in the United States. Right, so now that's who publishes both of these books. So when all that happened, and all these years that I've been speaking, it dawned on me, and I mean this sincerely, that I've been called upon to do this in everything that I do, and I really firmly believe that, and you'll see how passionate I am about this. So I wanted to share that story. I promised Father Royal that I would, because I think it's very relevant, and we're going to get right into it now. Everybody ready?